centered in many ways around this question of, I think to this point, our educational materials have been developed with the sense that we want people to be committed to justice. We want to give them a foundation so that they can pursue justice, ask the right kinds of questions, but we haven't been so specific and targeted, and I think we're moving much more toward being much more specific and asking our volunteers to come back and really commit to specific legal justice issues. And I think that within the next 6 months, you'll see a whole new mission statement for AJWS and much more of a tie-in in that way. And our educational materials will change a little bit too.
Can I say one more thing about about the immersive piece? Because I think we think a lot about it in terms of immersive programs are very expensive. And they're only for the time in which you're in the program, and then there is kind of hopefully, we're sort of all banking on, that there's a lifelong effect, and it changes kind of hopefully the course of what you choose to study or where you choose to work or just the kind of personal life choices you make. But I've been really struck lately, and I think it kind of connects to the community piece of ABODA, but all of these programs have a community aspect. And I think none of you are running immersive programs, so in terms of how this relates to the work that you're doing, I think that our challenge as a community is really to think about how do we do these in non-immersive ways. And I think it's a lot about community. I read a piece, I sent you, right? Mm-hmm. Which, if you read it, talks kind of about how the challenge of doing it in a non-immersive way. And I think, like, to me, the balance of trying to figure it out is, like, how much service do we need to do to, like, be accomplishing something? And then how many community touches, like, with our peers, in order to like help you stay accountable and keep doing it and keep learning and growing. But I think that this non-immersive piece is going to be very important. Like we should still keep doing our immersive thing, but I think it's unsustainable if that's the only way, because you go off and have a life and you can't just keep going on immersive programs, but you have to also continue to serve and pursue justice.
Sort of leads into the next question, which is, we're often asked as social justice educators, how do we balance our social justice education with our Jewish identity education and Jewish identity building? And I guess I would like to ask from your experience, do you see this dichotomy between social justice and Jewish identity? Do you see them as integrated, and how does that play out?
Okay, I'll go first. I like this question. Look, I think I became a rabbi who does social justice work for precisely the reason that my whole Jewish education was about them being in opposition, or at least disconnected from one another. I grew up in a conservative synagogue in the suburbs of New York, and maybe a little rural. It's on the border of suburb and rural. But I think it was like a fairly normal for that time Hebrew school education. And from my perspective as a kid, I would say it was like our teachers thought if we only would like learn about Shabbat and Kashrut and history and values, like, and how to read and maybe speak a little bit of Hebrew, then like, I don't know, maybe we would get to social justice after that, but we never like got there to a satisfactory enough level that we ever found out what comes next. And I think personally, I always felt like service, and what I later learned was called social justice, but it wasn't a term that I ever heard anywhere growing up. That felt important, and the Jewish piece felt important, but like they never were related. Never in synagogue did anyone ever talk about justice or really service for anybody else. Like my parents were on the board and did a lot of like service things, but they were all like for the synagogue, or you know. So I grew up feeling like those things were not connected. When I finished college, went to Bulgaria and worked for the Joint Distribution Committee for a year, teaching in the Jewish community, and then I came back and worked at American Jewish World Service. And I think for me that was like totally an education. And the truth is now I will admit that probably I would have paid them to let me go to work every day. It just like I felt like I grew up as much there, and found there that there were a lot of other people who cared about social justice, thought it was related to their Jewish identity, and were looking to us for curriculum. And we didn't have it. And so I was kind of on the ground trying to figure it out, and then decided to go to school so that I could be better trained and like actually feel like I had earned the seat at the table to talk about the things that I was kind of teaching already. So it's exciting to me that there is, first of all, a field, and that there could be a panel, and like that there are kind of a lot of people in the field doing it now, and now where I feel like we're trying to figure out how do you like get the research in, like all of the things that you need to like actually make it an effective field. Like now we have people doing it, and now we have to be careful about how we make it a well-respected, productive field that's gonna not just make us feel good about what we're doing, but actually going to be able to accomplish something in terms of pursuing justice. But I would say that I have always thought that like we turned it on its head, and if my Hebrew school teachers had like talked about justice and service in a Jewish context, I would have been a lot more interested in learning the other stuff. Now, they probably feel satisfied because I became a rabbi, but I think, but like I'm the only kid from my Hebrew school class or Hebrew school who did. So I think that like there's something about flipping on its head and making this a piece of like some of the intro part that would be very important. The other thing that I think is just worth considering, but we can't address now, is just kind of, I think that right now we're at a time where people sort of are kind of labeled as either you're a social justice Jew or you're an Israel Jew. Mm-hmm. And I think that like we really have an issue about those two things not going together. And so I think it's something that we should work on. And since you are in the trenches, I offer it to you as a challenge. And I'm happy to help think about it, but I wanted to mention it.
Okay, great. So I think I'll just talk a little bit about the how. So we integrate social justice education and Jewish identity building in everything that we do. We don't see it as a dichotomy, and I think I'll just give a few examples to sort of make that come to life a little bit. So we use a lot of Jewish text and text study in our curriculum, and I mentioned this before, but the text study sort of, right, we start with the questions that we have in the world that we live in today. So in the course of a service experience, those are the kinds of questions that I mentioned before. Or in everyday life, there's a whole variety of questions that emerge for people. And we look at Jewish texts that help us to go deeper and sort of like examine those questions in a thoughtful way. And when I'm in the field teaching, I tell my participants to imagine the Jewish text as a voice in the conversation, in the kinds of questions that they're asking themselves. So this is one response to this question, and they should bring their own responses to those questions as well. So I describe the text as it's the same thing as I mentioned, as looking at a piece of poetry or something else. But at the same time, it's also something that's very a part of our Jewish identity, our history, text study, and it's something that a lot of our participants haven't been exposed to in the past. Some participants have been immersed in it from a very young age, others have had no experience with it whatsoever. So it's sort of an interesting opportunity to bring people together and think about social justice questions through a Jewish lens. We also use a lot of sort of different Jewish practices, like Chavruta study, for example, becomes a big component of the service experience. I'm currently writing a curriculum for a one-year fellowship for recent college graduates who go to India for the year. And they're all over 2 states working by themselves in NGOs, and they have a Chavruta. We've assigned them a Chavruta partner at the beginning of the year, and that person is their Chavruta throughout the entire year. Most of them have never done a Chavruta before, and that person becomes a thought partner, an intellectual adversary, someone that they can connect in with, and it's just become sort of like this is something really cool that's part of my own tradition that now I'm sort of making come to life in the context in which I'm in. We also we're experimenting a little bit with Musar practice and helping participants think of, they're going through this massive period of self-growth and contemplation, and we have offered them sort of a version of Musar that's been really helpful with them. They work with their Chavruta through a text study on a particular midah, particular sort of like soul trait, patience, humility, things like that we believe are very integral and important to them being a successful volunteer and a future social justice leader, but also sort of opening up Jewish tradition to them so that they can meet it where it's at and play with it a little bit. So that's